to be in the practice of doing things scared. This is a live and a conversation that I have been meaning to have for quite a while now. But I've put it off for so many different ways and so many different reasons that I'm finally just like, you know what, just do it. I don't I don't care what I look like, blah blah blah. Like let's just put it out there. For anyone that's new to this space or this channel, my name is Ami. My pronouns are he, him, and I am a black, queer, and trans and neurodivergent um traveler, immigrant, and world traveler. So on this channel, I talk about my experience living abroad, leaving the country, all that good stuff. And if you want to go on that journey with me, make sure you tap in and hit that subscribe button. With that being said, this live is going to be a bit more structured. So I already have my notes on the things I want to touch on with you all, and I'm going to open up for Q&A at the end. I'm not going to have too much visibility of the chat. If you guys at all any point can hear me or anything, please let me know. I'm also going to take this live and chop it up and make it a podcast because I think it is something that I want to make sure it's a bit more accessible, even if someone's not able to watch it. With that being said, let's get started. So, what makes me qualified to talk about this? I lived abroad and traveled for the last 2.5, 3 years. I'm currently living in the States, but over that time, I think I'm just naturally a person that's always trying to be sometimes overly aware of my surroundings and my impact I'm having on my surroundings. With that being said, I've been told many times in conversations with folks of like, wow, like I never thought about that, or oh wow, like the way you think about things or you talk about these things is like I don't think many people think about those things when it comes to traveling or living abroad. So I think it is important to create space to share some of those things that I feel like are important when it comes to living abroad and traveling because folks, there's a way to do it, I think, that can reduce harm. So yeah, let's get into it. So the first thing I'm going to offer that I think most people may not want to talk about, but I think it's still very much important and imperative. Let me set up my notes over here. is surrounding around COVID-19. So I think it's important when talking about COVID, positionality is important to talk about. Um, I want to start out by saying that I think, especially when you're traveling and navigating in other countries, it's important to realize that we are a guest or we are a visitor in that country. With that being said, it's important to acknowledge our positionality. It's important to acknowledge that where we are coming from, there's probably a lot other or different or more privileges and access to things that the places that we're visiting don't have. With that being said, in a lot of places, and I'll give a specific example. When I'm traveling Thailand, I'm very intentional about if I'm in an indoor space or a crowded outdoor space wearing my mask. I still think even in the States here, I'm still wearing my mask, but I think it's important to remember that in I'll be specific when I'm giving these examples. In Thailand, there's a lot of people like your street food vendors or the people that you're seeing like working at 7-Eleven or whatever. A lot of these people are working every day. They not I don't want to say these people, but it's important to remember that in a lot of different countries, the medical systems are a lot less robust. And also, there are different privileges that we have. In the US, if you get sick, I mean, this is controversial because our insurance and all that stuff is not the best, but 9 times out of 10, you can access care in some way. Now, this is not true for a lot of communities in the US, but I think on a much wider scale than it is in other countries. With that being said, that's not always the case. In a lot of other places, people do not have the privilege to take off of work. They do not have the privilege to be able to go to the doctor and be seen or have quality health care. So with that being said, I as a visitor, I as a traveler, I'm going to enter that space being more careful about how I'm impacting it. Whether that's me wearing my mask, whether that's me being more intentional about where I'm going, how many people I'm around, testing before I go to certain spaces. Now I get this pushback of like, oh, well, I go places and some people in that place don't wear their mask. Well, me as an outsider coming into their community, I'm going to be more inclined to spread something to them than they are to me. Um, But also think about as you're traveling, you're exposed to a lot more people. You're exposed to a lot new different environments, and it's a different type of thing. So I just want people to remember that a part of conscious travel is community care. And a part of community care is health and well-being. And it can be very imperative for us to prioritize those things, even if we're doing something that even if you decide you don't want to do it in the States, I really encourage you, wear your mask, be conscious, take your COVID test if you have an inkling that you could be sick, whatever the case may be vaccinated if that feels right to you. But do these small things that can really take care of the communities that you're visiting to. That ties into my next thing, positionality. I think it's important that we listen to the most marginalized when we're listening to information and context about a different country. Why is this? For example, in the United States, if you look at a lot of news or different things like that, and you see a lot of things happening, your perspective of what's happening in the United States is going to be a lot different if you're listening to indigenous, black, disabled, queer, trans, like, and intersectionals of all those identities. If you're listening to those folks of their experience, the experience of a white cishet able-bodied man in the in America and like a black indigenous queer trans woman who's disabled, whatever the case may be, in America is going to be two wildly different experiences. So I want to urge us and encourage us to listen to the most marginalized or seek out resources and information from the most marginalized in communities that we're going into, because I think that's only when we will have a at least a better or fuller understanding, or like a more complex or well-rounded um, understanding of what's going on in this country, what are people going through, what are people needing. Also, with position I think is important, to know when to shut up, know when to pass the mic, know when to sit down and give the spotlight to someone else. This is imperative because I think um, sometimes as Americans, myself included, I've had to learn to shut up and it's not my time to talk. Even with my many marginalized identities, sometimes it is not my space, it's not my time to be the center or the person like trying to explain something to people. Sometimes it's not my voice that's needed, and that's important to remember. An example I have of this is when I was living in Cali, Colombia, and there were a lot of people that were talking about what was going on. And at that time, I had a really hard grappling of like, what is my space in this? It's not my space to try to tell people what the experiences of people, especially Afro Colombian people and other intersectional identities. It's not my place to explain their experience. But it is my space with someone with a platform to make space for other folks to hear their experience, whether that's sharing things, whether that is creating space. That's still something I have grappled with, but that's a small example of like, even me, there have been times I need to be like, this is not my story to tell. Who can I find? What do I need to find so I can center the people whose stories do need to be told? All right, the third thing, the third thing that we can talk about, learn the language. This one's kind of simple, and a lot of people have talked about it, but I think some people don't talk about the reasonings for it, or like why learning the language is so important. People talk about, yeah, like you need to know how to like order your food and like get around and navigate things. Let me get some water real quick. Hold on, y'all. But all right, so but another big thing around this is by learning the language, you're help bridging the gap of communication. I think when you have two or more people trying to communicate, there is a very clear there's a lot of times I think we have to realize, like, coming, especially if you're American, coming from a westernized society, when you go to other countries, there's already this preconceived understanding and power differential between like people from other countries. So there's a lot of times that people from places that you're visiting or traveling to will try to like meet you where you're at. They will learn English, they will do all these things. But at the end of the day, y'all, we're visiting another country. So, how can we be active participants in bridging those gaps? How can we put in the labor and the time and the intention and the energy in bridging that gap of communication, which can be bridging a gap of community? So, don't make it the responsibility of folks in another country or the places that you're going to. Don't make it always their responsibility to reach out to you. You also can make that reach. You also can do the things to make sure that they are able to have fluid and ongoing communication, whether it's the smallest things of ordering food or like, hey, please share with me. I would love to hear more about your experiences. I would love to hear more about your story, which can be some of the most enriching conversations and experiences. I'm talking too fast, y'all. um, Next thing, number 4. So, and these aren't necessarily numbered, but it's helping me keep an idea. So, next thing I'm going to talk about is learn and adhere to culture. And this kind of connects to the previous one. But what I mean by this is just because folks will cater or center you where you're visiting does not mean that they should. Just because folks will center you doesn't mean that they should. What do I mean by this? Here, this kind of goes back to the COVID in Thailand example. In Thailand specifically, during when the pandemic was starting to loosen and travel restrictions were lessening and things like that, there was a big push for a lot of big companies, especially within tourism. They instructed a lot of their employees to stop wearing their masks because not only was it impacting the experience of foreigners, their experience with traveling, but they don't want the foreigners to feel like, oh, COVID's still happening. Like, because in a lot of other countries, like the US, like masks were quickly and surely not being a thing. So I say this all to say is that in that instance, you had this community of folks that were centering the needs of another demographic of people for the interest of money. Now, there is a clear understanding of why they did this, but what can we do as travelers coming into the space of like, you know what, even though I know that maybe there's systems within where you live that are creating you to have this environment, I'm going to do what I can do as an individual to make sure you feel seen and like, you know what I mean? And it's the small things. And some people like it's not that big of me, but it is. I think it is. It can be. So instead of just going there and being like, yeah, they're going to center my experience and I'm good. How can you learn and adhere to their culture? Wearing a mask was a thing in Thailand before the pandemic and lots of parts of Asia. When you're sick or sniffling, put on a mask. Even if this was before the pandemic. If you are just learning the little things or the big things about the culture of another place can really set the difference of your experience you're going to have when you're there. So make sure you're doing those things. Okay, number 5 or whatever. The fifth thing I want to talk about: extract, and I mean this so deeply. Extract money from your view of your value as a traveler. I'm gonna say that again. Extract money from your view of your value as a traveler. The reason I say this is because I don't know how many times I have heard people say like, "Yeah, I'm going abroad and I'm contributing to this country's economy and I'm helping them by spending money." And people say things like, "Oh, this place is poor, like they need money, they need tourism, blah blah blah." No, I'm not gonna, and I'm not an economist. I do have one of my degrees in political science, but I'm not an economist. I'm not going to talk about the economy and we're not talking about this. But my question is, how are you contributing to that community outside of a monetary sense? What is the value that you're bringing to that community or that space that goes beyond money? Because that has so much more value. If we are talking about, especially nowadays, like wanting to, find a new world outside of these capitalistic white supremacist like type of frameworks and that we are living under. That means we need to decenter money in everything that we do. We need to remember that money is not the only thing that we bring to the table. How are you as an individual or as a collective, if you're a group traveling, how are you bringing value to that community? And I also want to be wary of like the whole like mission trips and like savior stuff too, because that stuff is a little, but what the value you're bringing, are you actually coming there to have intentional conversations with people? Are you bringing value in the ways that you're sharing culture with people? And are you coming there, but not, and we'll talk about that in a minute too. Are you coming there to learn and to be receptive and to actually like making sure that what you're doing is a reciprocitous like experience. You know what I mean? But at its core, I think there's so many ways to bring value, but I just want us to extract money from the center. Money is not the only reason you as a traveler, you can be valuable to a community outside of the country you're from. So again, I ask, how are you contributing to that community outside of monetary sense? Because if that's all you have to talk about, I think there's room for growth. All right. Next thing I have, be open to other realities and ways of doing things. This is a issue that I personally had, a problem I had to work through, and I probably in some ways am still working through when I travel. There is no right way to do anything, like anything. And I know, especially coming from the United States, there are a lot of ways that we are taught that our way is the best way. We are the best country in the world, and da 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 da, blah 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 blah. That's cool, but it's not true. There are so many ways that people have done things, whether it's the small things of like drying clothes or washing dishes, to the big things of like community care and structuring of societies or communities that have been done differently and arguably better in other places. So when you're traveling and you're moving around the world, be open to that your way of doing things may not fit that way. And be open to trying different ways and trying new things and knowing that you can't come into it like, oh, well, I just need to show them like this is a better way of doing it. Like I'm from the US. So it's like we do it like this, and this place is underdeveloped or underprivileged. So, like I gotta show them like the better way to do it. No, no, keep that at home. You are in another place to learn, to grow, to experience a different culture, a different reality. If you're going somewhere just to teach other people about the way you do it, cut that. No. And I say this with love because I had to check myself at times of like, oh, well, in the States, we do it like this. And, I think it could be better. And I had someone literally be like, just because you're from the States doesn't mean everything you do is necessarily better. And I'm like, and it was a hit at first, but I was like, you know what? You're right. Like, just because the country I was born in has been put on this pedestal of like this idealistic way of doing things or being or whatever the case may be, which I would argue is going down as we speak, that does not mean that like here's an example. Like for me, I grew up my whole life. My mom always telling me, you wash the dishes with hot water because if you don't wash them with hot water, then they're not clean. There's some countries around the world that don't have hot water coming out their sinks. There's some countries where there's no hot water at all. So you're telling me that their dishes aren't clean, that they shouldn't be eating off of them? But for me, I was like, at first, I was just like, oh, like these might not be clean. But I had to check myself and realize, like, no, every single place I've been going to and eating off of, I'm fine. Like their dishes have been perfectly fine, perfectly clean. So I say this all to say to bring it all together. Be open to other realities and ways of doing things. There's not one way of doing things. And when we are more open, we are more susceptible to be able to learn and grow and be more well rounded. Excuse me. um, excuse me. Okay. The last thing I want to touch on, and this is especially for folks that maybe don't hold as many or any marginalized identities, is I think it can be a very beautiful and important experience for anyone to understand or at least learn from the most marginalized in your own country. If you are American and if you are white, able bodied, if you're cisgendered, if you're heterosexual, if you are um college educated, like if you make a lot of money, whatever the case may be, or if you even are just non-black or non-indigenous, whatever the case may be, Understand the experiences, the real life of the people in the own country that you're from. Because I think it does a couple things. Number 1, it makes you realize we ain't all that. The US ain't all that. Like we're really not. Like um and it makes you kind of like take it off of this pedestal that you've maybe have always put it on of like I'm from the best country in the world. But also what it does, it allows you, I think, to humanize the people that you're meeting abroad more. When you're able to understand that some of the people that you're interacting abroad, like I feel like there's this dissonance sometimes when people see poverty in a new way when they're in another country, in a way that they're like, wow, like I can't believe this is happening. This is so sad. Like there's people in the US, maybe not in the same ways, but in very real and very like horrible ways, experiencing poverty, experiencing um being what was the word I'm looking for? Um being disconnect I can't think of the word. Being disconnected from their human rights and their basic needs. There are people that whose rights are being questioned and taken away from them on a daily basis. There are people that have no rights, that have no access to healthcare, that have no access to the just the basic bare bone things that they need to survive. There are people dying every day in the US from poverty. Now, this is not me comparing, but it's like if you're able to understand on some level that even in your own country these things are happening at some level, then maybe you will not go abroad in other places with kind of like this savior complex of like, I'm here to help, I'm here to change your like live realities. Cause it's just like there's people in your own country dealing with that. What are you doing for them too? And I'm thinking, and I say this all with like, I think both need to be held. Both are equally important. Um, so yeah. So, understanding the experience of the most marginalized in your own country, I think, can be an amazing thing so that when you are traveling, you're able to do it in a way that is more, again, well rounded. And anything else I want to say on that? I don't think so. If you have any questions, that's kind of all the stuff I had planned to talk about and listed. But if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat. I know there's some folks that kind of popped in, popped out. But I'm open to answering questions. And yeah, and I think I also want to name like this is an ongoing conversation. I think this is an ever evolving conversation. This is something that we will continue to have to talk about and to change and evolve, whether it's the language we use around traveling and moving abroad, whether it's the how we do it. But I think it can be a beautiful thing to um, be intentional of how we show up in the world and how we go about creating community with each other and yeah, like just creating community. Um, so yeah, anything else I have to say? So yeah, this will be available, I think, as a podcast as well. But I'm gonna kind of clean it up a little bit. But thank you so much for watching. If you aren't already, make sure to follow me on subscribe to this channel. I hope to talk about more things like this and broaden this conversation even more. And what else? No, that's it. All right, y'all. I love you so much. Thank you for the space to be real, to be me, to be human. Thank you also for the space to continuously learn and expand and grow and my understanding of myself and the world. And I love y'all so much. Peace.